be talking for a little bit.
I don't have your charger, I have an A charger.
It's okay, I have one today.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for coming. We are very excited to present all of our panelists today. This is an event that is part of the Student Week Against Mass Incarceration, which is a nationwide initiative. And today we will be focusing on juvenile justice and mass incarceration. I would like to introduce our panelists. So starting from here, Monique Lin-Luse is the Assistant Counsel of the NAACP Legal Defense and Education Fund. Her work is focused on removing barriers to educational success for all students and ending the criminalization of youth of color. Monique is a proponent of community-led interventions that utilize multiple forms of advocacy to eliminate racial, gender, and other disparities in education, housing, and economic opportunities. Charlie Whitewolf works at the Theater of the Oppressed, which is a non-for-profit that partners with social service organizations and city agencies, forming theater troupes with community members who face pressing social, economic, health, and human rights issues. Charlie has previously experienced homelessness and incarceration, and Charlie goes by the pronouns they and them. Kimberly Forte is the supervising attorney at the LGBT Law and... Sorry?
I was just going to say Kim is fine.
Oh, okay. Kim Forte is the supervising attorney at the LGBT Law and Policy Initiative at the Legal Aid Society, where she directs a unit that engages in class action litigation and collaborates with organizations to reform city and state policy. She's the primary author and provider of LGBT BCQ+ cultural humility trainings for both the society and outside stakeholders to improve legal and social services for low-income New Yorkers. And last but not least, David Miranda is the senior staff attorney at the Urban Justice Center's Peter Cicino Youth Project, which works to interrupt the cycles of poverty and criminalization faced by homeless and street-involved young people, especially LGBTQ young people who are disproportionately affected. David represents youth in criminal courts in New York City on misdemeanor, summons, and felony cases. So I am going to just start off with some kind of general guiding point questions for our panelists, and then at the end we wanted to open it up for audience questions as well. So Monique, can I start with you? Oh, bad timing.
I thought that was going to happen.
So Monique, a topic of interest of yours is criminalization, perhaps the over-criminalization of youth of color, specifically in the school environment. Colloquially, we call this the school-to-prison pipeline, which is something that I myself didn't know about until maybe about a year ago. Can you tell us about the work that you do for the NAACP Legal Defense Education Fund and how you see the education system contributing to youth incarceration or criminalization?
Sure, I'd be happy to. So good afternoon, everyone. I guess I'll tell you a little bit about the Legal Defense Fund. So the NAACP Legal Defense Educational Fund is a separate organization from the NAACP, but we had common roots. It's a 75-year-old organization. It's the oldest civil and human rights legal organization in the country, founded by Thurgood Marshall, the first black Supreme Court justice, who argued Brown versus Board of Education, among many other cases. And so we've worked on education issues throughout the entire 75-year history of the organization, and probably about 15 years ago, along with some other civil rights organizations, really began to be concerned, now almost 20 years ago, about the rise in referrals to law enforcement and the overuse of exclusionary discipline in schools. Sort of the root of that is, I think it's important to kind of explain kind of why we call it the school-to-prison pipeline and sort of what are the causes of that. So essentially it was sort of the sort of perfect storm of circumstances that has led us to where we are today, where there's reliance on school resource officers and security measures as opposed to on counseling and educational supports for students who may struggle in school. essentially zero tolerance policies, meaning you make a mistake and you receive the harshest punishment possible in schools, was really also reflected and along the same rise as sort of the tough on crime bill of the 90s, right? The concerns about the super predator youth who was going to commit all these crimes, all a myth, right, which has been disproven, but at the time, it sort of people felt like they needed to have some sort of more, tough, harsh, and very punitive systems. So, just by show of hands, any of you all, when you were in school, ever talk back to a teacher? Ever get into a fight? Ever break any school rule at any point in time in the course of your education? Right. Okay. How many of you all were arrested as a result of that? Right. So that is in fact the circumstances, and that's when we talk about the school to prison pipeline. That's what we're talking about. We're talking about, regular. Everyone does that. In fact, probably the reason why you're in this room is because you're the kind of people that questioned authority, right? And you ask questions, and perhaps you broke rules. That's a part of sort of regular adolescent and child development, right? You test boundaries, but instead of sort of addressing that behavior. And sort of using it as a teachable moment that it's meant to be. Most of us probably got sent to the principal's office, maybe you got a detention, that's about it. Instead, it's suspension and expulsion, which means lost instructional time, and also referrals to law enforcement because sort of the schools have been left without the resources for counselors, but have all the resources they need for cops and other forms of law enforcement. Essentially, also coupled, I think it's really important to think about the school to prison pipeline and the role that the school system has in it, is that it's not just that teachers are lazy or don't care or feel like they'd much rather have all their students arrested. I taught middle school and high school in New York City before I went to law school, and what I witnessed in my very first year of teaching was a school resource officer hassling a student. And my principal intervening in there because she was sort of bothering her about not having a pass or whatever, and he was then arrested, along with our dean of students, also arrested for intervening on behalf of a student that was a difficult student. I can't say that she wasn't, but it was someone that we were working with, right? And so instead of letting sort of school officials and educators do what they know best, instead you have law enforcement and other things interceding. That coupled with the fact of the sort of narrowing curriculum, which is part of the perfect storm over the past 15, 20 years, and sort of the emphasis on high-stakes testing, which really says, if you're being judged and evaluated and your pay and your job is contingent upon the scores of your students, you may not want to take the time with the student that is struggling, and you may want to have that student removed, right? And so there's a perverse incentive that was also built into that. There have been a lot of gains, though, and a lot of lessons learned, and a lot of successes. And I think the last thing I'll say is two things. One of the things that we do at LTF is we focus in a lot on the racial disparities, because this is a sort of a nationwide problem, right? This reliance on exclusionary discipline, but it's particularly a problem for students of color, and even more so for students of color with disabilities, who should have additional protections based on their disabilities, that they should be, before they, essentially it's called a manifestation determination, right? So before a student with a disability is excluded or receives a harsh punishment, administrators are supposed to investigate whether or not the behavior that broke the rule was a manifestation of that child's disability. But oftentimes that does not happen, and instead those students are punished and pushed out of school. So the other thing is that we work with the Dignity in Schools campaign, which is a national coalition in 27 states, represented about 100 community-based organizations of parents, students, and teachers, who are all working to stem the tide of the school to prison pipeline, who are all working to use other positive behavioral supports. They have a campaign right now, counselors, not cops, and have been pushing for a moratorium on the use of suspensions and expulsions for students for minor misbehavior. And that campaign has been unbelievably successful. We provide federal legislative support, which has seen really great gains that we hope to not lose now. So there's that.
Thanks. Just to follow up on that, I was wondering, the appointment of Betsy DeVos has sparked a lot of controversy among other strong emotions. I was wondering if there were any specific concerns that you have with her appointment.
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of concerns. First, I'm from Detroit, Michigan, and from Michigan, and it's home where my family lives and is being educated. And she is, in many ways, personally responsible for the failure and the decimation of Detroit public schools through her unyielding, unintelligible commitment to charters and vouchers and the privatization of schools. In the face of all other evidence to the contrary. So LDF opposed her nomination, her confirmation, because she has this hostility towards public education. And as Brown v. Board said, public education is the very foundation of good citizenship. And if you don't believe in it, how can you run the federal department of it? But she's in now. And the good thing is, actually, which has turned out to be a good thing, is that in the course of this past year, there was the reauthorization of what you commonly refer to as No Child Left Behind, right? That rings a bell. Which is always sort of just a title for a legislation that was sort of essentially an anti-poverty civil rights bill in the 1960s called the Elementary Secondary Education Act. And the new version of it is the Every Student Succeeds Act, or ESSA. And in that reauthorization, something that we fought very hard against was reducing the federal role and putting a lot of responsibility on states and local education authorities to make sort of decisions about how to evaluate themselves and to really do a lot of self-policing. As someone that works on racial justice issues, I always have great concern about relying on the states to enforce federal constitutional protections. But in this case, there's a silver lining, because that means there is a lot that Betsy DeVos cannot undo, because it is now relegated to the states. And the benefit of having had sort of the real grassroots support for these kinds of issues and looking at alternatives to exclusionary discipline like restorative justice and positive behavioral intervention supports, the benefit of that is that the grassroots are already embedded in the State Department of Education, who are coming up with their plans, they're working with them, and so hopefully there will still be the accountability at the base. But what's even a bigger concern than DeVos is what we anticipate coming from Attorney General Sessions, who's very hostile towards federal intervention. And if you saw this week, he already said that he wants to pull back on the investigation and monitoring of police departments. So all the great gains that have occurred over the past several years of the Obama administration with the consent decrees and monitoring of the sort of the actions of police departments, which in some ways also looked at school police. For instance, in Baltimore, school police were also involved in sort of the consent decree. That there's a concern that he will push and roll back sort of the coordination that had happened between the Department of Justice and the Department of Education. So it's really a space to watch that we have a lot of concerns about. But, you know, we who believe in freedom must go on. So thank you.
Charlie, I would love to hear about your experiences. I noticed that you raised your hand when Monique asked if anybody had been arrested for violating a school rule. I was wondering if you would be willing to talk to us about your experiences and how you got to where you are today.
Hi! During high school, it wasn't an actual high school, it was one of those alternative high schools that I got tricked into going to. There they had several rules of like, don't go in the hallway, even if you have to pee, hold it in or whatever. And if someone's bullying, you can talk to a teacher. You know, the basic rules of high school. At some point in time when I was coming out as they, them, and being trans, under trans umbrella, somebody had I would say the audacity to come up to me and say that, well, you're not human, and we don't want you in our school, and I can continue on what they're going to say, but I want to relive that. But they just kept, it happened every day, it would not stop. And then people started joining in, and I could not take it anymore. So, as a quiet person, so I don't want to get into trouble, because I look like I can get in trouble, I try not to. I'm just saying, I'm black, so it happens. So one of the kids had happened to try to put their hands on me, and when it comes to putting your hands on me, I'm gonna retaliate. So when the person tried to put their hands on me, I retaliated and actually broke like the library glass, because the library is like on the fifth floor, and it's right there in the middle. So you have like those double glass, what do you call those? Kind of bulletproof. I don't know if it's bulletproof, but I happened to crack that. And the rule states, if you break something, you're gonna pay for it. So I broke that rule of like walking in the hallway and also breaking their window, all because of this one student. Now I've told multiple teachers, this kid is bothering me and I don't want to retaliate because I have that anger management thing going on. So can you please remove this student or can I switch classes? They said no. So that's what happened. As far as schooling goes, some things happen, not proud of. There's a teacher kind of thing going, or a student-teacher relationship that was actually violated that I did not like. I don't like being approached. If I'm outside of school, don't approach me, because I'm no longer in school, so you no longer have that higher audience. I don't want to talk to you regardless. Some teachers are cool, some teachers are awesome, but that one teacher did not respect the boundary. And so when he told me, oh, I have this, that, and the third, I'm like, listen, please do not come outside. When I'm not in school, don't approach me. I don't feel comfortable. So later that day, he started going about and like trying to like out me and be like, listen, you're not doing your work, you're not doing your schoolwork. Meanwhile, I was actually dealing with homelessness at the time period. Two more teachers actually knew that I was doing homelessness. Homelessness is hard, I'm not gonna lie. Especially dealing with a father who's actually Jehovah's Witness. So you can't imagine that. Yay, Jehovah's Witness. So dealing with Father Jehovah's Witness, who's also, I will say, gay on the side. You can put you in your notes. My little joke. But dealing with that and then having to deal with him, I kind of just blew it all out. I had enough. I told him, if you want to meet me outside, you can meet me outside. You can catch me outside. How about that? Not the exact words. But so then I got detained and they were like, listen, you can't threaten the teacher. I'm like, I already told you guys, he's doing a lot. I can't handle it. I'm dealing with homeless right now. Can you please just leave me alone? Then I got arrested. Handcuffs are so fun. And they're so sexy. No, they're not. I was detained and told them that was a high risk level and I would be going to jail or what's that thing called again? Detention. I was going to detention. However, Glenn, who is my biological father, told me that I would not retaliate under certain conditions. Therefore, they dropped it and then was, I guess, released. So I'd have to serve detention. Besides that, after like 2 years of high school, I finally left my father, and because we weren't in a house, we were actually in a shelter system. I'm pretty sure everybody knows the shelter system, DHS. So I get confused with the acronyms. So I was in a DH shelter with other people and whatnot. That's scary. Then having to actually leave him was even more scary because I don't know New York City. I am from here, but I was down south. I was raised down south, so I don't know nothing about New York City. There, I came in front, I was talking to social work about, listen, I need to leave. They want us to leave at this certain period, but he's not doing what he needs to do. From there, they're like, okay, listen, you can go here or here. So I chose AFC, which is Ale Forte Center, which is an LGBT youth center. So, fortunately, I got a bed. Not that same day, I actually went out to go talk to them, I need these resources, but also to, I'm sorry, but also. So they gave me a bed. It took some time because I'm scared. I'm terrified, I'm horrified, I don't know what to do. Because I'm like, what, 16? Around that age? I don't know what to do. So I left after what I heard because he was planning on actually dumping me in DHS and actually going to Florida himself with the rest of the family. So from there it was just like, okay, I gotta do my own thing. So they dropped him and I went to AFC housing. AFC housing is actually pretty cool, I'm not going to lie. But other than that, they do have some issues they need to filter out. I'm not gonna say which. Don't laugh at me, guys.
We're not laughing.
We're not.
I know.
We know AFC.
Okay, you know it's AAC, if nobody knows, like I said, it's an LGBT center for only LGBT youth. So they provide beds for only for like 30 days. If you're familiar with the shelter process, you get a 30-day stay for that bed. Sometimes you can get more, sometimes you don't. They have rules and regulations you have to follow. And if you don't, you're out in the street again. And it's not fun being on the street because it's scary. I will give you like an instance. One time I did lose my bed because I wasn't there on time. And that was like my last write-up. We had 8 write-ups altogether. And then I had to sleep outside. I was in Riverside? I say Rivington. So outside on Riverside. I do love the woods, but it's also scary because, you know, spiders and creeper crawlers. I hate spiders, guys. I really hate those things. But imagine being outside. It's cold. It's starting to hit winter, so it's like hot and cold. So you don't know what to do with your lifespan. And then hearing like a homeless guy yelling and screaming about, and sometimes it actually might come towards you. Because believe it or not, a lot of homeless people actually sleep in the woods or in the parks and whatnot. Not on benches, but like on the actual ground. So that was scary enough for me to go back to AFC like, hey, listen, you have a bed. No, okay. I managed to get a bed from a friend's house. Then I went to Covenant. Covenant is the worst place for LGBT. Please do not send any of your clients there if you're social workers. Do not send a client. That's the most scariest place on the planet. As I was not really transitioning, but getting to know myself better, I came out of GNC. For those who don't know what GNC is, gender non-conforming. I don't conform to any gender, he or she, they or them, or just my name. So I got my name changed. They wouldn't follow that law. I would say the courtesy of like changing my name on the paperwork. So I kept calling she, it, alien, name it. They said it. I was the thing in Covenant. Sometimes I couldn't use the bathroom because I presented as masculine on the female floor. If you don't know, Covenant has like a female floor and a male floor. So I could have chosen between like the male floor and the female floor. If I go to the male floor, I'm probably going to get raped. Probably. That's a high chance. If I go to the female floor, okay. I have a chance of getting into fights and I can actually sleep at night. So a female bed. But they still didn't have the courtesy to change my name on the roster. They didn't have the courtesy to use the pronouns that I wanted to pronounce myself as. Then later on, a lot of things are happening. Glenn is back in New York City, and they're all just like, hey, how you doing? I will tell you this, that my family is not the nicest people on the planet. They did a lot. When I was younger, they did a lot. But when they're back in New York City, they're like, hey, how you doing? Let's catch up. So I told them no, don't want to catch up at all. And then they start all the remembrance of what they did. Everything. So from there, I'm probably like, I would say like 18. Still looking for housing, still looking for like places to get my head on. So I find a place, I'm back in an AAC bed, then managed to get to Till. Till is like a longer stay, you have a year. If you're over like 21, you have up to 6 months. When I got to Till, it's like me like hitting 20. So around 20, I was like, okay, I need my game on. So then I went to about trying like getting jobs and whatnot. I had prior gotten like, what do you call that? Internships. They were at the door, they were at Forte, they were at Streetworks, whatever I get my hands on. Any money I can get my hands on, I will do it. Then when I actually got to the Till, I actually got a job. Now the thing about some places, they are major. Can I curse? Sure. They're assholes. They're major assholes. So, as you know, guys, like, my name is Charles. So you're gonna automatically think, oh, that's a boy. That person's gonna come in a suit. They don't got no titties. They're just masculine, all types of just masculine. So when they see me, they're just like, what the hell are you? Why are you in a suit? And later on, they're gonna ask for your ID. So being that I'm GNC, there's like no gender marker right now, so I have to go with female or male. I can pass for both, which is fun, but the female is still on the ID. Even with the other ID, like the New York City ID, are you guys familiar with that at all? So you know you don't have to put a gender marker on that, right? So I had no gender marker on that. They still asked me if I was a male or a female. And then I told them, like, does it really matter? They're like, you just get out then, because, you know, you don't present this and that. So getting employment is kind of hard. I did manage to, like, land, like, two employers. Then from there, it was just like, okay, I got a job. I got a license, I got a license for OSHA, which is actually pretty hard. Like, the OSHA not itself is hard, but the classes were there are hard, because you're still presenting as GNC. So they're going to mess with you, because it's mostly men. Not men, all men are bad, but the really ignorant ones are the worst. So, being that I was presenting as GNC, they kept, like, bugging me, like, are you a she, are you a he? Oh, can you pick this up? Yes, I can pick that up. Oh, bend over. No, I'm not going to bend over. What the fuck are you doing? All types of shit. Sorry for cursing. After that, I actually managed to get, like, right now I'm in supportive housing. Supportive housing is until you're 25. Now this place, it's the door. It's door housing. So I'm not out of the woods yet. I still have my own apartment, but it's not really mine. It's part of the program. It's helpful in some ways not, because they still have this issue of, like, pronouns. They still have the issue of, like, if I have a guest over and I'm having a really bad day, because I'm not gonna lie, I do have some mental health issues, but I'm not a monster. It just happens. But like say I'm having either an asthma attack or a panic attack or just like a depression altogether. If I'm having somebody over at a certain time, if they come past 12 o'clock, they have to, like, sign in and whatnot. It's perfectly fine. Sometimes stay longer than 2 days, but then they give you a hassle about it, which is a lot. Apparently that's allowed, apparently. They can take 14 days. And if you kind of, like, go against the rules, they hate you. This is my last, like, instant or example. I had a point where I was arrested. There was and it's my biggest mistake in my whole entire life. There was a neighbor who I thought, you know, I fancied her. And we talked and whatnot. And then I got to see, you know, she was a little too comfortable, too clingy. So I told her about, like, how I work. Don't punch me, don't do anything, because it's gonna do a trigger. So I told her to never punch me in the back. Don't do that. I don't play fight, don't do it, because I think it's real. From my past experience, I think it's real. So she punched me in the back, and then I just blocked the fight 5 seconds. Hit her stomach. I didn't mean to do it. Now, I will tell everybody here, I have metal in my hands because of my past experiences. I'm like a walking sidewalk, so I punched her, and then I was like, oh my God, can we please go to the hospital? You are hurt, you are keeling over, can we please go? She refuses. She refuses to go. So I'm like, can we please go? Please. I'm begging her, my friends are begging her, can you please go? Because she already has, like, stomach problems. And then she says no. I'm like, alright, that's fine. Later we had complications, and then later, I will say, like, later that week, I was arrested. I was arrested for domestic violence. And I told the cops, it's not my fault. She hit me first because she did a trigger, so it was in retaliation. No, I'm still the more masculine person, so I'm going to go to jail regardless. So the more I'm masculine presenting, you hit her because she didn't do something, or she didn't do something right. I felt like, no, that wasn't the case. Because if you get to know me, I'm actually a very quiet person. I'm very lovable, and I'm very kind. I'm just quiet. But the police didn't want to hear that. Took me in. I couldn't even get a coat. So I went to the detention or Century.
Or Central.
I went to Central Bookings. Central Bookings is freezing. Can y'all do something about that?
Can you?
I wish.
Yeah, it was freezing in there. Instead of being there just once and like, hey, this and the third, I'll tell you more about like the experience there. But it was freezing in there, And I was just like, oh my God. So instead of being there once, I went there twice for 2 different occasions. One for the domestic dispute and one for her stomach. Because apparently she had caught some type of keloid in her stomach. And I told them, because I'm never afraid to admit anything, which I probably should not have done. Because when I'm wrong, it's when I'm wrong. That's my thing. That was my fault.
Take it from the 3 of us.
Yes, no.
Yeah.
You're wrong.
I wish I...
Very quiet.
When they say don't speak.
Don't speak.
I should have listened. So, when I was there, like I had cops that were not that bad. Some of them were actually pretty decent. Some of them just like, listen, we don't give a fuck, just shut the fuck up. They had like, so my hands were like, I'm pretty big, right? So my hands are right here. They have to use 2 handcuffs or like 3 to give you some space. Now those handcuffs are not comfortable. I never want to be in them again. But they are not comfortable. So they're tied behind my back, and they're kind of loose, but not really. So this one asshole cop decided to tighten them. And then I told them about the thing in my hand, and they're just like, listen, that's a threat. It's not that I'm telling you because it's a thing that I go through. Because if my hands get too tight for some odd reason, it likes to just go limp. So they tightened the grip, and then my whole hand started turning purple. My whole hand. The left one. It's always the left one. Started turning purple. I'm like, I can't feel my hand. Can you please loosen it? No. Of course not. So I get the Century bookings. They're like, okay, so where does this thing go? Oh, okay, this thing? I'm a human being. That's one. Because I usually talk back if I'm being wronged. I'm a human being, so you can go with my name. So they're like, okay, so where does Charles go? Oh, they go to the guy floor, but then there was this whole argument. This whole argument could have been just like, listen, just go. Just go to the female floor. There's an F on the ID. But no, there has to be a whole argument about my gender. They patted me down, asked if I had titties, asked if I had a VJ. And I was like, does this really have to happen? Does it really? And then when I got to the cell, the whatever the cops that were there, or whatever you call them, they kept coming to the goddamn cell and asking about my guy. And I would say about maybe every 20 minutes. Are you really a girl? Are you really a guy? Does it matter? Y'all cut me, right? The second experience was even worse. Because it was the same people, but they wanted it like an actual pat down. So they're flipping everything up and whatnot. I look for things that drop, grabbing places, and I'm like, do you really gotta grab me like that? Like, I like girls and all that, but you don't fit my fancy. Can you stop grabbing me? I'm smart, as you can see. So that happened. I had other incidents with police, but they couldn't come in because of false accusations. If y'all want to laugh really quickly, there's one girl that's in my apartment complex. She says she's pregnant with my child. Guys, I do not have a penis. I don't have one, nor do I want a dildo. So I'm wondering, how did she get pregnant? She's a lesbian. I'm gonna leave y'all with that.
That's a
Quite a mic.
what? You got David and I like this, like in the worst. How did you follow that up?
So glad I went first. So glad.
Oh, I was
I've never been so
wait,
glad.
complete last
Like,
thing. Complete
no,
last
go
thing.
ahead.
I live near a precinct, precinct 42, or I think it's precinct 4, one of those. I skateboard. I come my skateboard today because in fear of like this is my board. So we have a ramp. I go down the ramp every day. These dickhead cops want to come up the nose and literally like kind of like hold their arm up so I can fall or whatever. There's an instant where one of their cars came out of nowhere and I actually like fell on some like glass. Like, where you going? I'm like, going to the store. I'm hungry. They're like, where's your ID? What'd I do? I just came out my house. That's not your house. I have my keys. These are my keys. You don't live there. Had to ask staff to come outside. Does this thing live there? This thing? Oh, Lord. So, yeah.
Thank you.
That was...
Thanks, Charlie.
Thank you for being so open. Kim and David, I would just like to hear about your work that you do, respectively, that kind of involves the intersection of LGBTQ youth and homelessness and criminalization. Can you talk about maybe what you're working on right now and kind of the sort of specialized or unique struggles that your LGBTQ clients go through?
Sure. It's up to you. You want me to go first? All right. So, you know, one of the major things I do, the Legal Aid Society is the largest public defender in the United States, and so we have some 750 plus defense lawyers. So one of my big things is I'm trying to constantly raise their level of cultural humility as it relates to the intersectionality of identity. So really getting our defenders to really understand why identity and someone who has multiple identities of communities who are oppressed are more likely to be their client, and really constantly educating our workforce so that they are cognizant of the experiences of their clients. That may seem obvious to most of you, and when you, I think when you're deciding to enter the law, you think you're interested in those parts of it, and you're researching it and taking classes in it. But once you actually start practicing, you become under I mean, David can really talk about it because he's a defender, and being at Bronx Defenders in the past, the caseload is quite intense, right? And so you're not always cognizant of society and how it oppresses people at all moments, because literally you're running from like courtroom to courtroom and being screamed at by court officers and trying to get in the back to see your client, and then like trying to eat a slice of pizza so that you can like have enough energy to get on to the afternoon, right? And you're worried about the fact that you have a motion due by 5 p.m. and there's no way you're going to get back to your desk, and how are you going to edit it, and you know, so you know, it's great to think that we're all functioning at a level of cultural humility. And the reason I use cultural humility is we used to talk about cultural competency a lot as it related to, you know, and I focus mostly on working with low-income LGBT, GNCQ plus New Yorkers in our practices. And Legal Aid has a juvenile rights practice, and we have a civil legal services practice as well as our criminal defense practice. And then we really recognize that we can't be competent in other people's culture and other people's experiences, so that's why I'm using the terminology cultural humility. So it's not something that's present as a human being. We're not trained as human beings to walk around the world being culturally humble. And I'll give you an experience. We don't walk up to people saying, "Hi, what's your name and what's your personal pronoun?" Right? We just don't do that, and we don't introduce ourselves that way either. And so that's an experience of cultural humility that we should have in our everyday vernacular as part of just our existence, so that we know that we're addressing people appropriately. But we just don't do it because people don't want to do it, and we haven't programmed ourselves as humans to understand how culture is impacting sort of everything we all do at every moment. And so that's a large piece of what I'm trying to do at the Legal Aid Society as it relates to all the work that we're doing. I'll highlight one case that we brought recently. In this past year, we brought a case on behalf of 8 women, 4 of whom identify in the transgender community, or maybe 5 of who identify in the transgender community, to have the loitering for the purposes of prostitution law overturned. And I'm on that team internally at Legal Aid with an incredible civil rights lawyer by the name of Cynthia Conti-Cook, who's in our criminal special litigation unit, and Kate Mogilescu, who runs our exploitation intervention project, where we have in each of our practices, in each of our 5 boroughs where we represent people in the criminal justice system, we have a unit that focuses on people who are accused of prostitution-related offenses. And Kate has been doing this work for quite some time. She's a national leader in it. And what her team has observed during the course of the time is that you may have seen this in the New York Times in these articles, it's the reality of trans women walking down the street and just being arrested for just being who they are. And the piece of legislation, or the law that is mostly used for that, is loitering for the purposes of prostitution. Now, most of the loitering laws in our state have been found unconstitutional, and across the country. You may be familiar with those cases. I think the most famous being Morales versus Chicago, the gang loitering law that was found unconstitutional by the Supreme Court several years ago. This one has stood And the police use it as a tactic to basically police queer people of color. And it was originally used in the 90s at the piers when young people would go there, and the well-to-do, really well-to-do lesbian, gay, and bi community who lived in the village, I'll call my community out on this one, middle class and upper class, didn't want black and brown children hanging out at the piers because those piers were built for them and for their neighborhood, not for somebody else to come and use them, right? And so they would call the precinct. They would call the 6th precinct, and the 6th precinct would come out and corral all these kids up and arrest them. Well, they managed to get those young people moved out to other parts of our city, like the Bronx and Bush. And now we see the same arrest tactics happening in those communities. And these are really just people hanging out on the street, literally. I mean, we have people who are walking from like one friend's house at like 9:30 at night to another friend's house, or walking home from like hanging out with their friends, and they're just arrested. And the probable cause that it's based on is what she was wearing, the fact that she's a she, right? So the law doesn't say gender, but men don't get arrested under the law, statistically proven, right? So they're not stopping men. The fact that somebody may have talked to somebody on the street. And when we look at the sworn affidavits by the police officers, it was like she was wearing jeans and a t-shirt. So it's so offensive that they would even arrest a woman based on what she was wearing, bottom line, regardless of what that is, right? That a woman can't walk down the street, or I shouldn't say that, a woman of color in New York City cannot walk down the street wearing whatever she wants without being subject to arrest. But you can go out on the Upper East Side on any given Friday night, and more revealing outfits are going from door to door to door of every club that is open and available to other communities, and no one thinks twice about it. Or they set up Fashion Week in Lincoln Center, where women walk down a runway wearing nothing at all, and it's considered fashion. And our government, but if you think about it, like if Mayor de Blasio lost Fashion Week, the money that it institutes in New York City, we promote it on one end, right? And then we arrest women of color on the other in certain communities. And that's what we're seeing. And so this law is both challenging that law on its face to say it's unconstitutional because it's overbroad, and void for vagueness. It doesn't give the public enough notice to understand what they're doing wrong by simply walking down the street. And we're also suing the police department because of their discriminatory practices by targeting women of color, particularly trans-identified women of color, in their communities for this arrest. And so that is some of the class action litigation that we bring, and these brave women who are willing to come out and tell their story. And much like what Charlie was saying, the same similar experiences, right? They go in. So, and some of the other work we're doing in conjunction with Urban Justice Center and other organizations is really challenging a progressive mayor who says that he's a sanctuary mayor and he really wants to do right by queer communities and trans communities and communities of color, and yet the minute you are arrested if you identify as trans, you lose your gender identity. You are automatically your sex assigned at birth, identified by your sex assigned at birth. Upon arrest, no guilt, no trial, no nothing. The arrest alone, you are therefore labeled only by your sex assigned to you at birth. You cannot be placed based on gender identity. So we have a mayor who like, oh, we're the best when it comes to trans student rights and we're best whatever, except if you're arrested. And so then we know, and when we know about broken windows policing and what we know about the history of stop and frisk in our city, that isn't not ending. And he just said yesterday at a press conference, we firmly believe in quality of life policing. So loitering for the purposes of prostitution, quality of life arrests. Cleaning up neighborhoods. That's how they see that. And so the minute a trans woman is arrested and a trans man are arrested, they can no longer, they don't have any choice in saying, wait, just like if they 15 minutes before got to pick a bathroom that aligned with their gender identity, they don't get to pick an incarceration facility that aligns with their gender identity. It's all based on your physical anatomy. And so trans women go to males facilities at Rikers. We have seen instances in which the NYPD will place trans women in women's cells or isolate them in precincts, but that's that's singular to precincts themselves, not to actually incarceration facilities, so not to central booking, or not to the Tombs, or not to any of the detention centers at the local level. And so, you know, we're not as progressive as we like to think we are, and we can, you know, the governor and mayor, and this is true at the state level too, so if you get convicted and you're going to do state time, it's all true. And we struggle to have our clients receive the medical services that they deserve once incarcerated. And even though we can make the argument to the city repeatedly and repeatedly and repeatedly that queer people of color are more likely to be poor, homeless, you know, be underemployed or not employed or discriminated against when they're employed, judges are still setting bail, people still can't make bail, so they're staying in jail. And so no matter how many pleas we make to the system itself about how we are over-criminalizing the queer communities of color in our city, nobody is sort of hearing it, including your progressive mayor. And then I'm going to turn it over to David.
Hi. I work with the Peter Cucino Youth Project at the Urban Justice Center, and what we do is we represent exclusively homeless youth who are 25 and under, and overwhelmingly a large amount of those youth are LGBTQ or GNC identified. And we run clinics at all of the facilities where homeless youth get services. So I kind of feel like a lawyer who still makes house calls, in the sense of like, I go to where they are. So I go to Ali Forney, I go to Covenant House. I'm familiar with all of like the policies, of, like the stuff. I go to Streetworks Harlem, Streetworks Lower East Side, and we also go to Hetrick Martin Institute, which is another agency where that serves LGBTQ youth, GNC, whether or not they're homeless or not, but a lot of homeless youth also go there to get services. And I was also one of those kids, I want to date myself now, I was also one of those kids in the 90s when the village was changing. And the pier, if you don't know, it's beautiful, like, I mean, it's physically, it's more beautiful now, but I think emotionally and culturally, it was probably one of the most beautiful places then. Right. And I actually saw when that started to change. And I remember, the thing about it is with our youth, LGBTQ, GNC identified youth, is that a lot of our lives take place out in the street, because home is not necessarily a safe place. So where we go to meet other youth like us, I feel like a kid now, talking like I'm a kid, but anyway, where we used to go to meet other youth like us was out in the street, right? And everybody would just be hanging out, voguing on the pier, or doing whatever, causing, you know, kids being kids, we make noise, right? Like that's what young people do. We scream, we shout, we do sometimes we do stupid things, yes. But yeah, I remember that when the change started to happen, when people started to want to move out there, in what used to not be like a aesthetically beautiful place, but really had a rich culture in it, that was when the police would come and arrest overwhelmingly young people of color, and they would actually be at the pier waiting to see who was doing what. And you know, if you were smoking weed, or if you was they would just be there waiting to arrest and take, with a van, ready to take people over to the 6th precinct to then be taken over to the pier. And I know. And back then it was for using the wrong bathroom even. Even that kind of stuff.
At the beach.
So you know, but even as a public defender, what I see now is I've seen a lot of that. I mean, I think at central booking now they do place people who identify as trans or gender nonconforming. They do place them in their own cell. Yeah. However, the complaint that I've heard in the Bronx specifically is that, yes, the correction officer will go every 20 minutes or every 30 minutes and say, oh, you're just confused, why are you dressed like a woman, and just keep making these comments until finally we get out into arraignments, and you know, then you can address whatever issues. But I think there are issues where officers are certainly like disrespectful. And the other term that I never heard was the others. So it was like in Queens,
the specials.
In Queens, they had, which I've never seen before, but in Queens they have a cell, like a special cell where people who are trans who are picked up on these loitering for prostitution raids are put in one cell. So there'll be like 7 people in a very small cell. It's not like the larger cell where men and women who are not trans identified are put in. So it's the experience is more traumatizing. But what I also see is young people getting arrested for just being young people and doing what young people do, right? And made into very serious cases. So you have a case where people will get into a fight. It'll be a group of kids, because as kids, what do? You want to fit in with your peers. You hang out with other kids. You cut school, and what do? You get into trouble, right? So there'll be a fight, and because it's a group of kids, and maybe, I don't know, somebody might have taken something from the other. I think one time it was $1 or something silly like that. But because it's a group, right? It's a group, not ganging up, but beating up on one, right? That no longer becomes what in essence is a group of kids fighting, which is what kids do. I've seen it. I've probably done it. Like, that's what kids do. But it turns into a robbery. It turns into a felony robbery. Like, you have a group of kids who are arrested for felony robbery. And then because they're youth of color, right, all of a sudden, they're no longer just kids being kids, they're kids in need of services. So now this kid needs to go into mental health treatment, needs to go into, like, it's like you're pathologizing what really is just normal human child adolescent behavior. And I think I see that a little bit too often. I also think that the agencies that provide services to youth need to do a better job, and I think that's what you were talking about when you were talking about Ali Forney. But I have one case today that I stood on today, that it's another agency that is supposed to provide supportive housing to trans and LGBTQ and GNC youth in order to help them make the transition into permanent housing. And this particular agency has kind of a pattern and practice of, once youth act out, right? These are youth who have already been deemed to need additional services. Once youth act out, you evict them. And it's actually like a large pattern and practice. I've talked to other attorneys who've done multiple cases with this one particular agency where once a youth acts out, they just evict them. And in this case, they want my client to get a criminal record. Right? So sometimes even the agencies that are supposed to help us are not exactly doing that. And I don't know, I think it's kind of disheartening to me to hear what the mayor said yesterday about broken windows policing, because a lot of what my clients get arrested for is just for stuff that they're doing because they have to be out in the street so much. Because they don't have anywhere to go. Sometimes they can't access the shelter until 8 o'clock or 9 o'clock at night, because that's when they get to go to their bed. So yesterday I had a summons for climbing on a wall. So I went to court for a kid who was a young person. Climbing on a wall is an offense. It's a big offense. This judge took it very seriously. Yes, climbing on a wall. So this young person had to take time out to go to court. If he didn't go to court, a warrant would be issued for his arrest, right? And luckily he was with it. He had an escort because he was deemed to need additional service. He actually had an escort take him to court. So you had to take the time and the energy to go through all that. The police had to process this summons and run a warrant check on him when they gave him the summons, right? So think about how much money that cost for climbing on a wall. When we got to court, I thought it was the silliest thing in the world. I thought this judge was going to be just like, this is ridiculous. But no, the judge was fuming. He was so upset. He was like, do you realize the danger that you could have caused yourself and your potential rescuers? And your potential rescuers. Yes, he was furious. Long story short, you never know what judges are going to take serious. But this is just a young person climbing a wall at a park. Like
At a park?
At Morningside, yes, Morningside Park. It's like...
Wait, Morningside?
Morningside.
I climb those walls. Wait!
Don't. But these are the things we're talking about, right? This is what we're talking about when we talk about school to prison pipeline. Would that young person have been arrested if he was
If he was in Bensonhurst climbing the same wall in a park in Bensonhurst, he wouldn't. I mean, I remember this really interesting experience. I was actually out with family, and a family member of mine's son, who was 16, got caught in a park with, like, I don't know, several joints. They were wasted, like acting a fool. The police called the mother. I go with her because I'm now, of course, I've had a couple of drinks and I'm thinking this is stupid on my part. But let me go and say to the kid, don't say anything. I'm going to go and invoke, and then we're going to get a private lawyer. Ba da ba. We go in, and the mother comes in ready to kill her kid because she's furious. How could you do this to yourself and me and embarrass me like this? And the cop says, ma'am, I need you to calm down. He's just a kid.
Oh my God.
No, he's a white Irish kid in Bensonhurst.
How would that conversation have looked if he
Right.
was a person
And
of color in
she
the
was
Bronx?
being threatened almost to be arrested because she was going to get so mad at her kid that she wanted to beat the crap out of him for being so stupid. And the cop is like defending this kid. And I just shut up and walked away because I thought, oh, don't run your mouth now, because now I'm going to say,
Things are
why did you
going
move the
well.
bucket? I was like, good night. We're going to all go. Thanks.
What's amazing too. Oh, go ahead. You were saying something?
I was gonna say, I had an instance where I was actually walking home from a program. It was, are you familiar with 125th Street at all? Because I didn't park. Marcus Garvey, I think it's Marcus Garvey Park. So at a certain point, it's like you can't go through, right? So I'm trying to run home because I have a curfew, and it's like I have like 5 minutes to get home. So I'm running through the park, and I jumped over the gate and just started like booking me. This cop, I don't know if he saw me or not, but like he had this little powers, and I'm not gonna lie, they were drinking. I had a little bit myself from the party that I had with friends with the program, but they were drinking and whatnot. So I'm trying to bring it home. I get like toward the end, all I feel is the floor. That is all I feel. I look up and they're right there. I'm like, how did you see me? How did you follow me? How did you even keep up with me? Keep in mind, I am fast running sometimes. But the cop was just like so intoxicated. I guess he didn't know what he was doing. So he's trying to grab me and whatnot. Now I can be slippery. So I was like, okay, you know what? Fuck this shit. Because I learned some karate in school. So I was like, okay, slip, and then I ran. So he never saw me again. But the fact that my point is like, why are you drunk on the job? Why are you like? You could have like said, hey, stop it. I would have automatically stopped walking or stopped running. And then you didn't have to like pole mercy to the ground because that shit hurt. You never know. But that was it. That's what point.
Yeah. No, thank you. One thing I was going to say, I think is something that is a through line through everything that was described, is important to understand about the criminal justice system, is that it is rooted in maintaining white supremacy, right? That's how it started, right? That is slave patrols, right? That is, and no matter what we put on top of it, it always goes back to its origin, right? And so what's amazing, I think, about we think about the school to prison pipeline, it's called cradle to prison, whatever, is that there's only on ramps, right? There's no off ramps, right? Right? There's only on ramps for people of color, right? For children of color, because they're not seen as children in the same way that white children are seen as children. There's tons of off ramps for white folks. You make a mistake, oh, it's a mistake, right? I made a mistake, right? But there's no, it's only on and never off, and so the kind of the collateral consequences, right? Of you get an arrest. We have a case in Texas, Bryan, Texas. In the state of Texas, it's a misdemeanor to willful disobedience, not following directions in a school. So if a school resource officer sees you not follow directions or not willful disobedience, which is actually most common.
The definition of adolescence.
Yes, correct. It is the most subjective offense, right? And in any school district that sees high rates of suspensions and expulsions, they are undoubtedly one of the top 2 is going to be for. It's not going to be for fighting. It's not going to be for drugs. It's going to be for willful disobedience, right? It's going to be for not following directions. And so in this case, black students in the school were 4 times more likely to get these criminal misdemeanor tickets that then, if they did not go pay the fines, they did not go show up to court, would then roll over and they get bench warrants as soon as they turn 17, right? Bench warrants, they couldn't get licenses, right? It's kind of just, it keeps escalating, right? And so they got these fines, then all of a sudden now you've got a warrant out, and then you haven't done that, then you get bail, and it just becomes all of a sudden your life is ruined because one day you didn't like pick up the thing that you dropped or something, you didn't pick it up, your book, right? And the cop arrests you, it gives you this ticket, and then your whole life is sort of off track, right? So the kind of it's only on, never off, and so what sort of reform looks to do, right, is to try to figure out how to get people to think about children as children, to give them opportunities to make mistakes. And I think one of the great benefits of this lesson I realized I didn't talk about before is the importance of brain science, which is, it's sad, right, that like it took actual imaging of brains in order to convince both the legal system and just like practitioners, whether they be educators or health or legal or judges, right, to get them to understand that like children's brains, like adolescents, they're not fully developed, right? And the part that makes all the good decisions, that doesn't get developed in, boy, they say up to 25 to 21 at best, right? So 16, 17, 18, 13, 14, 15. But there's a reason why you can't, a teenager can't explain why they did what they did. Because they can't. They don't know. If they thought about it later, they'd be like, oh, that was I shouldn't have. But in the moment, right, all those other things are happening. And so that's really changed in some ways the way in which, the ideas about, what is the sort of, what's the likelihood of committing more crimes, about how to sort of intervene with students or young people has changed. At least it had begun to change. Again, who knows what's going to happen?
Well, what's interesting is we live in a progressive state, and we're one of 2 states that still charge minors as adults in criminal court, right? So, like, you can have people in power who love to talk their rhetoric, but in reality, the proof is in New York doesn't want to dismantle its criminal justice system to benefit children. They don't, and they're not going to.
They would execute. I mean, it was legal to execute children, right? To give capital punishment to children, to crimes committed while you were a child, up until the last 5-10 years, right? Think about it. Only countries, only 3 other countries. I mean, it's like nowhere else is that a thing. But in the United States, we love our punishment, and we hate our kids.
There was a question over here.
I have a question about, is there a way to maybe challenge these laws by saying or documenting instances of when white children in similar circumstances are let off the hook and making maybe kind of like a Yigwo argument as applied? And has anyone tried that before? Did it work?
You're the expert.
Yes, it does in certain circumstances. Sort of one of the challenges, just so sort of, essentially what you're describing is like we do like disparate impact, right?
Yeah.
Analysis, and what had been really in schools in particular, right? We want to be pursuing those under Title VI, which there is no private right of action, and so what had been done over the past during the Obama administration, we had a very open Department of Justice and Office of Civil Rights and the Department of Education that was willing to take these Title VI complaints and willing to do a disparate impact analysis. Not nearly as fast as they needed to do, not as often as they needed to do, but there was an openness to sort of having that be a mechanism to push things through. But the same analysis of being able to say, and the fact that the civil rights data collection, which is done by the Office of Civil Rights of the Department of Education, which looks at it's universal now, so every school has to submit this data about everything from how many students are taking chemistry to rates of suspensions and expulsions, referrals to law enforcement, truancy, all that stuff. And that was sort of the basis. That data was very helpful in putting forth some of those things that have led to change and reform. The data hopefully will still be collected. And actually what I've also seen are community folks in cities and in jurisdictions use that data to move their school board in a different direction and to push for policy change at that level. Because once people can see sort of you can see the disparities, kind of go, well, wait, maybe this isn't really what we thought it was, right? So it's been helpful in that way. But sort of the legal avenues are limited. However, it has been successful in sort of other sort of criminal contexts at times. But the Supreme Court is often a little wary, too, at times, of proving discrimination through disparate impact. So I'd stop there, because that could go on for a lot longer.
Well, and I would just say, there's now a huge effort, mostly through the Williams Institute, and a great researcher by the name of Angela Irvine out in California to show the disparate impact of LGBT youth in the juvenile and criminal justice systems, and obviously we know that these systems are predominantly filled with young people of color, so that's what the research is based on. And what we know is that as it relates to young people who are identified as girls, so the system identifies as girls, so they're most likely assigned sex at birth girls, 40% of them identify as not cisgender and not heterosexual. 40%. So we're seeing now with new data the disparate impact as it relates to young people to young women who refuse to behave like young women. Right? And so you juxtaposition that against the new statistics on what Generation Z, which is 13 to 20 now or something like that, that the adolescents these days, most of whom believe gender is on a spectrum, and 40% of them do not identify with their gender assigned at birth, or don't align to the expectations of their gender assigned to them at birth. And so we're seeing a system, and this is my like legal nerd part, but it's going to be fascinating and horrific too, to watch this generation of young kids come up in a system that is so gendered. And David and I and a bunch of other people do a lot of work to ungender these systems, right? To talk a lot about gender, like we all have gender responsivity people in our city agencies now. It'll be interesting to see what New York really believes when gender matters and when it doesn't. And how we forcibly gender people, for what reason, right? We have to start asking ourselves, why is your gender so important in this moment? And what am I using, and why do I need to know that information to serve you? Because that's what your government is supposed to do, serve you, not the reverse, right?
And that was in my pants.
What?
And that was in my pants.
Right. I mean, it's fascinating, like how much is gender relied upon in school? And so some of the stats that you're seeing is like, you'll see a school safety agent say to a young person, a young woman, like, stop behaving like that. That's not how girls behave. So what? And it's like ching ching, then the cuffs come on, right? Because this person, whether that person identifies as she, they, neither, he, whatever that identity that young person is, pushes back and says, how dare you talk to me like that? Which that young person should say that. Like, that's inherently a horrible thing to say to somebody. But that's where we're seeing, and we're seeing it significantly in the female population. And also, we're seeing, like, girls get arrested for stuff because somebody wants to save them versus being told that's what boys do. Boys just do those things. So girls get arrested for fights, things like that, because that's not how nice young ladies behave, but boys will be boys.
Kiss my ass.
So.
Sorry.
But I know there's some questions.
One more?
I don't want to like key people. Anyway, something that's really been troubling to me over the last few years is our solution for young people seems to be recently to have them move home, and that works for people who have homes, but a lot of people don't, and people who come through the foster system and then age out and then don't have a place to go have nowhere to go. And so my question is, have you seen a substantial uptick since this seems to be our new solution? I know many people that I know, I'm sure that many people here know people who have moved back in with their parent or whatever their circumstances might be. Does that translate into people that you are seeing in your practice?
Yeah, I mean, 50% of the young people who are homeless in the United States identify in the queer communities. So that's youth, so that's young people under 25 years of age. Right. Or identify as LGBT or on the spectrum of non-cis, non-hetero. And so we don't see that necessarily in the identity of the adult shelter population, but we do see it. So as the generation that we have now counted begins to age, it'll be interesting to see in adult homelessness. Although there's arguments and statistical realities that the reason why adults become homeless are not the same reason why young people become homeless, and that if you can stabilize a young person at an early enough age, they may not be an adult homeless person later on in life. And so their homelessness in some way will be remediated, and they'll be able to get a job and like get their own place and stuff like that. I think what the point you're making though is, as we see those statistics, the reality is and Charlie alluded to this, and when you get a bed, you're not free. right? It's not a free system, right? So like when I got to a certain age, my mother stopped giving me a curfew.